November 19, 1942. Feldwebel Hans Richter pressed himself against frozen concrete in what remained of Stalingrad's Red October factory. His squad, 8 men who'd survived since Operation Barbarossa began, occupied the 3rd floor of a gutted machine shop. Below, Soviet forces controlled the ground level. Above, nothing but twisted steel beams and winter sky. For 6 hours, silence. Then Richter heard it, a sound he'd heard twice before, both times followed by catastrophic casualties. Not the methodical chatter of a Maxim machine gun, not rifle fire. This was different. A deep, resonating buzz that seemed to vibrate through the building's skeleton. 900 rounds per minute creates a frequency that doesn't sound like individual shots. It sounds like industrial machinery tearing through metal. His squad's youngest soldier, who'd arrived 3 days earlier, asked what that noise was. The veteran Unteroffizier didn't answer immediately. He was checking his ammunition. 5 rounds left in his Kar 98K. Around him, his men had similar counts. Rationed bullets, rationed hope. The buzzing grew louder, accompanied by boots on stairs. Multiple sets, moving fast. Richter knew what was coming. Soviet stormtroops, each man carrying a PPSh-41 submachine gun with a 71-round drum magazine. In the confined spaces of Stalingrad's ruins, these weapons transformed ordinary soldiers into walking firestorms. If you want to discover what happened next and why this weapon broke German morale, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and comment below where you're watching from. This story gets darker. The PPSh-41 submachine gun entered Soviet service in 1941, just months before Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. Its designer, Georgy Shpagin, had created something the Soviet Union desperately needed: a weapon that could be manufactured by unskilled workers using basic stamping equipment. The Soviet military leadership understood modern warfare's industrial reality before most nations did. Precision firearms required trained machinists, specialized equipment, time. The PPSh-41 required sheet metal, a drill press, and desperation. The weapon's construction was almost primitive by German standards. The barrel housing was stamped steel, welded together. The stock was simple wood, often unfinished. The 71-round drum magazine was based on Finnish Suomi designs, reliable but heavy. Rate of fire was approximately 900 rounds per minute, slightly slower than the German MP-40's theoretical maximum. But the PPSH's drum magazine meant sustained fire. While a German soldier with an MP-40 carried 32 rounds and needed to reload frequently, a Soviet soldier with a PPSh-41 could empty 71 rounds in under 5 seconds. And they carried multiple drums. Soviet factories began producing PPSh-41s in numbers that German intelligence initially dismissed as propaganda. Small arms production in the Soviet Union during 1941 was chaotic. Factories were being evacuated ahead of German advances, reassembled beyond the Ural Mountains, restarted with workers who'd never manufactured weapons before. But the PPSh-41's simple design made this possible. By late 1942, production exceeded 150,000 units per month. For context, total German MP-40 production throughout the entire war was approximately 1 million weapons. The Soviets produced 6 million PPSh-41s. Feldwebel Hans Richter didn't know these production numbers in November 1942. What he knew was that every Soviet attack he'd faced in the past month involved more automatic weapons than the previous one. German squads were structured around the Kar 98K bolt-action rifle. 1 MG-34 or MG-42 machine gun per squad, maybe 2 if ammunition was available. The rest carried rifles. Good rifles, accurate rifles, but rifles that required working the bolt between each shot. Against Soviet infantry armed primarily with Mosin-Nagant bolt-action rifles, this worked. Against Soviet infantry where half the squad carried PPSh-41s, the tactical calculus collapsed. The sound Richter heard growing louder was 3 Soviet soldiers climbing the stairwell. Not a full storm group, those typically numbered 10 to 15 men, but an advance element, checking if the floor was occupied before bringing up the rest. Standard Soviet tactic in Stalingrad's ruins. Send a small team with automatic weapons. Let them draw fire, locate German positions, then assault with overwhelming close-range firepower. Richter made the decision every German squad leader in Stalingrad faced dozens of times daily. Fight or withdraw. Fighting meant revealing positions. His men had perhaps 30 rounds total. If they killed these 3 Soviets, more would come. If they wounded them, they'd call for support. If they missed, they'd be pinned down by automatic fire with no ammunition to suppress the enemy. Withdrawal meant abandoning the position, falling back to wherever the next defensive line could be established, giving ground in a battle where ground was measured in rooms and hallways. He chose withdrawal. His squad moved toward the building's rear stairwell, moving quietly through rubble. They made it 15 meters before the Soviets reached their former position. The burst of PPSh fire that raked the empty space where they'd been lasted 3 seconds. 71 rounds in that drum. Maybe 20 fired. The Soviets weren't wasting ammunition. They were announcing their presence. Psychological warfare through sound. What made the PPSh-41 psychologically devastating wasn't just its rate of fire. It was the mathematics of engagement in urban combat. Stalingrad's ruins created tactical environments where traditional German advantages disappeared. In open terrain, German rifles outranged Soviet submachine guns significantly. A Kar 98K could engage targets at 500 meters with accuracy. A PPSh-41 was effective to perhaps 150 meters optimistically. But in Stalingrad, engagement ranges were measured in room widths. 5 meters, 10 meters, across a hallway, through a doorway. At these ranges, bolt-action rifles became suicidal. The tactical sequence of a bolt-action rifle in close combat: fire 1 shot, work the bolt, chamber the next round, aim, fire. Perhaps 3 aimed shots in 5 seconds for a trained soldier. The tactical sequence of a PPSh-41: pull trigger, maintain aim, release trigger when target area is saturated. 71 rounds available before reloading required. German soldiers learned this mathematics through casualties. Unteroffizier Werner Goldfried, captured by Soviet forces in January 1943 during the Sixth Army's collapse at Stalingrad, described his first encounter with PPSh-equipped Soviet troops to his interrogators. His company had been tasked with clearing a 4-story apartment building near the Volga riverbank. Standard procedure: enter the ground floor, clear room by room, move upstairs, repeat. They entered expecting resistance, some rifle fire, maybe a Maxim gun position. What they encountered was a Soviet defensive position where every soldier carried a PPSh-41. The Soviets had removed interior walls on the ground floor, creating one large open space. When Gottfried's company entered through the main entrance, 6 Soviet soldiers opened fire simultaneously from positions along the far wall, approximately 20 meters away. Gottfried estimated the engagement lasted 8 seconds. In that time, he calculated later, the Soviets fired approximately 400 rounds. The acoustic effect in the enclosed space was, in his words, like standing inside a drum being beaten by metal hammers. The bullets didn't just hit targets, they ricocheted off concrete floors, metal fixtures, remaining wall sections. The room filled with lead moving in multiple directions. Gottfried survived because he dove through a doorway in the first second. 11 men from his company didn't. Not wounded, dead. Multiple hits per man. The tactical problem was immediately apparent. Returning fire was suicide. The Soviets had overlapping fields of fire and ammunition superiority. Suppressing them with rifles required exposing yourself to 6 automatic weapons. Grenades were the obvious answer, but throwing a grenade across 20 meters of open space filled with bullets was equally suicidal. His company withdrew.
They called for armor support. None was available. They called for artillery. The building was too close to German-held positions. Shelling it risked hitting friendly forces. They requested flamethrower teams. Those were already committed elsewhere. Eventually, they bypassed the building entirely, leaving a Soviet strongpoint in their rear, because reducing it would have cost more casualties than command deemed acceptable. One building, 6 Soviet soldiers, the Wehrmacht's vaunted tactical superiority, useless. The weapon itself was almost crude in its simplicity, which was precisely why it was so effective. German weapons engineering emphasized precision. The MP-40 submachine gun was well made, with machined parts that fit together with exactness. It was reliable when maintained properly, accurate within its effective range, and soldiers who carried it appreciated its quality. It was also expensive to produce, requiring skilled labor and good materials. The PPSh-41 abandoned these standards entirely. Soviet factories stamped out components from sheet steel, welded them together with techniques that would have horrified German armaments inspectors, attached wooden stocks cut from whatever lumber was available, and shipped them to the front in quantities that overwhelmed German forces through sheer numbers. A PPSh-41 might not be as precisely manufactured as an MP-40, but when 10 Soviet soldiers, each carrying PPSh-41s with 3 drum magazines, engaged 3 German soldiers with MP-40s carrying 4 magazines each, precision became irrelevant. 3,000 rounds versus 384 rounds. The mathematics were brutal and inescapable.
By December 1942, German tactical reports from Stalingrad contained specific warnings about Soviet PPSh tactics. A captured document from the 389th Infantry Division, dated December 8th, explicitly instructed squad leaders to avoid close-quarters engagements with Soviet forces known or suspected to be equipped with automatic weapons in quantity. The phrasing was careful. In quantity was the critical factor. A few submachine guns could be managed. Entire squads of them could not. The Soviets had discovered something the Germans had not fully appreciated. In urban warfare, massed submachine guns were more effective than machine guns. A machine gun was a crew-served weapon, requiring a team to operate, position, and supply. It was powerful, but static. Submachine guns gave every individual soldier automatic fire capability, creating a distributed system where the loss of 1 or 2 men didn't significantly degrade the unit's firepower. Soviet General Vasily Chuikov, commander of the 62nd Army defending Stalingrad, implemented what he called hugging tactics, keeping Soviet forces so close to German positions that German artillery and air support couldn't engage without hitting their own troops. In this environment, the PPSh-41 became the decisive weapon. Chuikov formed specialized storm groups, typically 10 to 15 men, organized around specific tasks. The assault element consisted of soldiers armed exclusively with PPSh-41s and grenades. Their job was to enter a building, room, or position and saturate it with automatic fire. Supporting elements carried rifles for longer-range suppression, demolitions for destroying fortifications, and whatever heavy weapons could be brought forward. But the core of every storm group was men with PPSh-41s, because in Stalingrad's ruins, the side that could put more bullets into an enclosed space in the shortest time won the engagement. German soldiers began recognizing the sound of PPSh fire and reacting immediately. Feldwebel Hans Richter, whose squad had withdrawn from the factory building in November, encountered PPSh-equipped Soviet forces 7 more times before Christmas. Each time, his response was the same: immediate withdrawal if possible, surrender if not. He explained this in his diary, recovered after his capture in January 1943. The Papasha, he used the Russian nickname Soviet soldiers gave the weapon, means you have perhaps 3 seconds to decide, run or die. Fighting is not an option unless you have overwhelming superiority or no choice. The sound alone makes men panic. It's not fear of death exactly. It's the understanding that your weapon is useless. My Kar 98K holds 5 rounds. I can fire perhaps 3 aimed shots before they close the distance. They fire 70 rounds before reloading. The mathematics are obvious even to the dullest soldier. The psychological component extended beyond immediate tactical encounters.
German soldiers in Stalingrad knew they were besieged, cut off from reinforcement, rationing everything, including ammunition. Soviet forces knew they had the entire Soviet Union's industrial capacity behind them. When German soldiers saw Soviet infantry equipped entirely with automatic weapons, wearing uniforms that, while crude, were at least complete and warm, carrying enough ammunition to fire for minutes instead of seconds, the contrast was demoralizing. This wasn't about courage or training or tactical skill anymore. This was about resources, and Germany was losing that battle catastrophically. The PPSh-41 was physical proof, visible and audible proof, that the Soviet Union could produce weapons faster than Germany could kill the soldiers carrying them.
The German response to the PPSh-41 threat was telling in its limitations. Officially, Wehrmacht soldiers were instructed to capture PPSh-41s whenever possible and turn them in for reissue to German units. The weapon's effectiveness was so obvious that the Wehrmacht began using captured PPSh-41s systematically, converting them to fire 9mm parabellum ammunition, the standard German pistol and submachine gun round, or issuing them with captured 7.62 by 25mm Tokarev ammunition. This represented a significant departure from standard practice. Captured weapons were typically used only when nothing else was available. The PPSh-41 was so effective that German armaments officials created conversion kits, manufactured new magazines to German specifications, and incorporated captured Soviet weapons into their official logistics system. But this created its own problems. Captured weapons required captured ammunition or complicated conversions. Supply officers struggled to maintain stocks of Soviet 7.62 by 25mm rounds alongside standard German calibers. Soldiers carrying PPSh-41s needed different ammunition than their squad mates, complicating resupply. And most fundamentally, relying on captured weapons was an admission that German arms production couldn't provide equivalent firepower. Some German units improvised solutions. The Grossdeutschland Division, an elite formation that typically received priority for equipment, began equipping entire squads with MP40s, whenever possible, attempting to match Soviet automatic weapons density with German equivalents. This worked when ammunition was available. In Stalingrad, ammunition availability was never reliable. Other units tried mixing captured PPSh-41s with standard weapons, creating hybrid formations that maximized automatic fire capability while maintaining some ammunition compatibility. But these were local solutions to a systemic problem. The Soviet Union was producing submachine guns at a rate Germany couldn't match, arming infantry formations with automatic weapons as standard equipment, while Germany still issued bolt-action rifles to the majority of its soldiers. By January 1943, as the Sixth Army's position at Stalingrad became untenable, German soldiers were surrendering to Soviet forces equipped with weapons that represented everything the war had become. The PPSh-41s carried by Soviet troops accepting German surrender were crude, barely finished, stamped from cheap steel. They were also exactly what modern industrial warfare required. Simple enough to mass produce, reliable enough to function in Arctic conditions without maintenance, effective enough to dominate close-quarters combat. German prisoners saw Soviet soldiers carrying 3, sometimes 4 drum magazines, each magazine representing 71 rounds, enough ammunition to sustain fire longer than an entire German squad's combined ammunition load. Some German prisoners reported their captors fired celebratory bursts into the air, wasting more ammunition in 10 seconds than a German infantryman might be issued for an entire week. The industrial numbers told the complete story. By war's end, Soviet factories had produced approximately 6 million PPSh-41 submachine guns. German production of the MP40, their standard submachine gun, totaled approximately 1 million weapons across the entire war. German production of the STG-44, the assault rifle of the most advanced infantry weapon of the war, totaled approximately 425,000 weapons. Even combining these numbers, Germany produced fewer automatic infantry weapons than the Soviet Union produced PPSh-41s alone. This disparity extended beyond weapons to ammunition.
Soviet factories were producing billions of 7.62 by 25 millimeter rounds specifically for PPSh-41s and other weapons, while German ammunition production struggled to maintain adequate supplies for existing weapons. A Soviet soldier in 1943 with a PPSh-41 could expect to be issued hundreds of rounds of ammunition. A German soldier with a Kar-98K might receive 30 rounds and be told to make them last. The weapon German soldiers feared wasn't feared because it was technologically superior. It was feared because there were millions of them, backed by unlimited ammunition, carried by an enemy that could afford to fire 900 rounds per minute while Germans counted individual bullets.
Feldwebel Hans Richter was captured on January 26, 1943, when his position in Stalingrad's northern pocket was overrun by Soviet forces. He surrendered to a Soviet officer carrying a PPSh-41, flanked by 10 soldiers, 8 of whom also carried PPSh-41s. Richter had 3 rounds left for his Kar-98K. His squad, which had numbered 8 men in November, numbered 2 in January. The rest were dead, wounded, and missing, or had simply disappeared during the final chaotic weeks. In his interrogation, conducted through a translator, Richter was asked what weapon he had feared most during the battle. His answer was immediate: the Papasha. Not Soviet tanks, not artillery, not snipers, the submachine gun. Because every time we heard that sound, we knew we were outnumbered and outgunned. A tank you can hide from, artillery you can dig in and hope. But when you hear 20 Papashas firing in a building you're defending, you know you have maybe 10 seconds before the building is theirs. Other German prisoners gave similar accounts. The weapon that appeared most frequently in POW interrogation reports wasn't the T-34 tank, though that was mentioned often. It wasn't the Katyusha rocket launcher, though that created terror when it was employed. It was the PPSh-41 because it was everywhere, in quantities that seemed inexhaustible. Carried by soldiers who could afford to fire first and conserve ammunition later. Soviet tactics in the final weeks of Stalingrad emphasized this advantage brutally. Storm groups would approach German positions and simply open fire without warning, saturating areas with bullets before even identifying specific targets. The psychological message was clear: we have so much ammunition we can afford to waste it. You don't. The PPSh-41 remained in Soviet service long after World War II, seeing extensive use in Korea, Vietnam, and numerous other conflicts. Its basic design, simple, mass-producible, effective, influenced submachine gun development globally. But its real legacy was established in Stalingrad's frozen ruins, where it demonstrated that industrial capacity could overcome tactical skill, that quantity had its own quality, and that the side capable of arming every soldier with automatic weapons would dominate close-quarters warfare regardless of individual weapon sophistication. German soldiers who survived Stalingrad and fought on the Eastern Front through 1943 and 1944 continued encountering PPSh-41s in numbers that never decreased. By 1944, some Soviet units were replacing PPSh-41s with the newer PPS-43, a simplified submachine gun that was even easier to manufacture. German soldiers noted this transition not with relief, but with deepening despair. The Soviets had so many submachine guns, they were replacing perfectly functional weapons with newer ones, while German infantrymen still carried bolt-action rifles and hoped for a single MG-42 per squad. The final irony was that German soldiers grew to prefer captured PPSh-41s to their own MP-40s when they could get them. The PPSh was heavier, cruder, less refined. It was also more reliable in extreme cold, simpler to maintain with minimal tools, and most importantly, when you fired it, you sounded like a Soviet soldier. In the close-quarters chaos of urban combat or forest fighting, sounding like the enemy provided precious seconds of confusion that might mean survival. German soldiers using PPSh-41s reported Soviet forces sometimes hesitating, hearing the distinctive sound and assuming friendly troops were nearby. These moments of hesitation could be exploited, but even this adaptation was ultimately futile.
Using captured weapons because your own nation couldn't provide equivalent firepower wasn't tactical flexibility, it was admission of industrial defeat. Hans Richter survived Soviet captivity and returned to Germany in 1949. In later interviews, he was asked what he remembered most clearly from Stalingrad. He didn't describe the cold, though temperatures reached -40°C. He didn't describe hunger, though his rations in January consisted of 200 grams of bread per day. He described the sound, the deep, mechanical buzzing of PPSh-41s firing in the ruins. He said that decades later, hearing certain industrial machinery would trigger immediate anxiety because the frequency was similar. He said the weapon itself wasn't what terrified him, it was what it represented. An enemy that had unlimited resources, unlimited manpower, and unlimited industrial capacity. Germany was fighting with precision and skill. The Soviet Union was fighting with mathematics and factories. And mathematics ultimately won.